Hello, welcome everyone to our Monday, May 4th Teaching and Learning Subcommittee. Superintendent for our opening.
Just an advisory to the public. This subcommittee meeting is not a meeting of the whole subcommittee, of the whole school committee. Therefore, per open meeting law, only subcommittee members may discuss, deliberate, and vote on matters before the subcommittee. The subcommittee members of this subcommittee are as follows: Catherine Hubley, Chair, Tom Leung, and Courtney Perdios, subcommittee members. Thank you.
Thank you. First item on our agenda is the North Quincy High School AFJROTC program update. Turn it over to Dr. Perkins.
On the ROTC program at North Quincy High School. As some of you may be aware, after a very long and very successful career in Quincy Public Schools, Sergeant De Lorenzo has decided to retire. And so we're going to miss him terribly. He has done amazing things for the program, and I know the kids just absolutely adore him. And so we have been working, knowing that this was going to be coming eventually. We have been working for actually quite a few years to try to secure a replacement for him. Unfortunately, that has been proving to be quite difficult. And so we, at this point, although we're still trying and we haven't given up hope, we are concerned that we may not have a replacement for Sergeant De Lorenzo for the fall. And so what we wanted to do tonight is update you on the steps that we have taken, where we're at in that search, and what our plan is if, in fact, we are not able to have an ROTC program in the fall. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Cosgrove, who will update you on our search process that's been pretty much ongoing over the past 2 years.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'll build on Dr. Perkins' overview by providing some additional context on how we arrived at this point and the steps the district has taken to try to staff this position. And I want to echo what Dr. Perkins said. This is a program with a long history of value at North Quincy High. It has provided students with leadership opportunities, structure, and a strong sense of community over many years. At the same time, the district is now facing a significant and ongoing staffing challenge. And it's important to emphasize that this is not a typical hiring challenge or hiring situation. In most cases, when we have a vacancy, we post that position, we receive a pool of qualified applicants, and we move through a standard hiring process. That's just not the case with the AFROTC instructor position. To serve as an Air Force ROTC instructor, candidates must be retired from the Air Force, typically with substantial years of service, within a specific post-retirement window and in good standing, approved and certified through the Air Force, willing to transition into teaching and in some cases relocate, and committed to ongoing training and expectations set by the service branch. Taken together, these requirements create a very limited and highly specialized candidate pool, one that is largely outside of the district's direct control. Currently, there are roughly 200 districts across the U.S. that have posted active ROTC instructor vacancies just within the Air Force, which is our program. Over the past 2 years, the district has made consistent and good faith efforts to fill this role. We have continued to post the position through the Air Force pipeline. We've maintained ongoing communication with Air Force representatives, and we've interviewed multiple candidates. Last year, we extended an offer to a candidate who ultimately declined and relocated out of the country. This year, we hired a candidate in the fall who began in the role, but determined after approximately 2 weeks that the teaching position was just not the right fit. Since that time, the position has remained posted, and we've continued our outreach efforts. These experiences reinforce that this is not a short-term hiring gap, but a structural challenge tied to the nature of the role and the program itself. It's also important to understand that the ROTC instructor position is fundamentally different from a traditional teaching role in our district. ROTC instructors are accountable not only to the district, but also to the service branch with dual expectations and evaluation standards. And the role extends well beyond the typical school day. It often begins with early morning drills around 6 a.m., followed by a full instructional day, and then continued involvement in competitions, trainings, and community events across the Commonwealth on weekends and evenings. These are meaningful and valuable experiences for students, but they also require an extraordinary level of time, energy, qualifications, and sustained commitment. Our current instructor has met those expectations at a very high level over many years. However, given the limited candidate pool and the scope of the role, the likelihood of identifying and securing a new instructor who can step into that position and sustain the program at that level is, at this time, realistically, quite low. So as we plan for next year, we believe it is important to be transparent with the committee about that reality. We will absolutely continue to work with the Air Force and pursue many and any viable candidates. But based on our experience over the past 2 years, we're not currently in a position where we can confidently rely on that pipeline to staff the program. Thank you.
So in understanding that, we have taken a look, we have asked all of the students to, as they register for classes, to list their second choice in addition to ROTC. And so preparing for that, the number one choice is actually business, and courses in line with that: entrepreneurship, intro to business, financial literacy. Those are by far the number one alternative selections. And so we have asked Mr. Cosgrove to post a business teacher position for North Quincy High School in the event that we are unable to secure another ROTC instructor. And I do, we're happy to answer any questions. I know Mr. Gilbert is here also to answer any questions, but I do just want to say before we conclude how much we value Sergeant De Lorenzo, what a wonderful asset he has been to this community and to the community at North Quincy High School. And I know that I speak for all of the students and all of the staff at North Quincy High School when I say that we wish him luck in a retirement that is absolutely well-deserved. And we so appreciate, clearly we see how hard, what kind of shoes we have to fill here, and it's not easy. And so we just appreciate everything he's done for Quincy Public Schools, and for us students. And I'll answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was going to say, I asked you to be here for this presentation because of the fact that I had heard months ago that Sergeant De Lorenzo was considering retirement, and now I know that he has decided to move forward with it. And I know the program is amazing, and it has just flourished every year, and the kids do an amazing job. One question I had is, have you heard any feedback from people going for the position that possibly we're not paying enough for it, or is the pay coming, deciding what the pay is? Is that from us, or is it from the military, or where is that coming from?
It's both. So we do have to match based on and I don't know if you can answer this better than I can, but we do have to match based on the Air Force salary. But then it is also our largest, in addition to that, it's our largest stipend that we offer in the district because it's an intense position. So he does get a pretty sizable stipend in addition to that.
Okay, all right, thank you. I am glad that we're making this transparent to everybody to know that this is going on. Thank you. Questions, Mr. Young?
Yes. Thank you for the detailed explanation of the situation. It is certainly disappointing to hear, but I do appreciate all the effort that you all are putting in to try to alleviate, the issues for the fall and possibly longer. So I guess just a couple of questions. Is this strictly the Air Force branch that offers ROTC? Are there similar programs offered by the other branches?
So the district currently has an agreement with the Air Force. So it is the AFROTC. There are very stringent requirements, as we spoke about, in terms of number of students that can be enrolled, but also the qualifications for instructors. We have considered other branches, the Marines, the Army, et cetera. The requirements are almost identical, just for a different branch, right? So the instructor would be coming from elsewhere. So as we've considered alternatives to, what would it look like if we can't sustain the Air Force, and we've looked at other service branches, we're realizing that that staffing pipeline challenge is potentially going to be the same that we have now.
Okay. And then what about any consideration for like joint or collaborative programs with other schools in the region?
I think there's only 2, I believe, or there's not many more than that in Massachusetts. And I think the closest one is like Taunton, maybe. So I don't know that that would be easy. Like, I don't think that would be feasible for us to collaborate. Yeah.
Strict, these regulations
Yep.
here, that it probably would not allow a collaboration.
Yep. Okay. And then finally, can you perhaps give me information or try to speculate on timelines, right? So it seems like we're likely not going to be able to offer this in the fall. What is the cutoff date for if you were to find someone by this time, it could still be offered in the fall? And then closely related, what would be the ramp-up time? Say it's not offered in the fall, but then how quickly could it be resumed if you were to find someone?
Yeah, so I think for us, we've kind of been saying by like August, because that's when the schedules are finalized. And so I think that if we were able to find someone, we could potentially quickly turn that around because we have their existing schedules currently. But I think, for the students to have that information, I mean, they're knowing now that this is we're going to begin to talk with them now about that this is probably more than likely what's going to happen. And I think they know he's retiring. And so, so we'll be working with them. But I would say for us to be able to pull it off for, say, September, really the beginning of August would be probably the absolute latest that we could go. I think, depending on if we were to find someone, say, in the middle of the year, probably like before maybe in between a semester or a trimester, a quarter, I should say, in the high school would probably be better, because then we could get their schedule straightened out and we could get the kids back in. I mean, ideally, the best time is for us to have it locked in for the start of the school year. But we're going to keep working with them. We're going to keep trying. But I know from Dan Pacho's perspective in IT, who handles scheduling, early August would be the latest probably he would like to see it go.
And sorry, one more. The business teaching position, once that is filled, how does that affect the decision making? Does that preclude you from acting on any ROTC plans?
It could. I mean, budgetarily, it could. It's the same position technically, so we would have to look at that and see if there was any other options. I do know that Mr. Segala needs some additional support in things like early college, and he has some grant funding. So could we potentially get creative and combine those kinds of things? So we would look at all of that if that were the case. So we're in talks about that right now. because business teachers are obviously a lot easier to find than an ROTC teacher. So we are getting a lot of applicants for that. Unfortunately, not so much for ROTC.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Perdios.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here and telling us all the details about this. And I appreciate your search and the thoroughness that you guys have been trying to kind of fill this position for a couple years now. And definitely thank you to Sergeant DiLorenzo for everything he does. He's fantastic. And, you know, I hear Mr. Gilbert, Principal Gilbert, talk all the time about how fantastic he is in the program at North. And the kids are just, you know, phenomenal. I've gone to the banquet and just heard the hundreds of hours of community service each of these kids do and the effort that they put in. So definitely thank you. Deep appreciation for him. And definitely deep disappointment that this may potentially go away. I know it's a really great opportunity for our kiddos. Can I ask how many kids right now are in the program?
There's 172 kids in the program.
Okay. So yeah, that's quite a hit to them and their families. So you know, sorry that disappointed that we couldn't fill this position and find someone for them. Once this goes away and we've, you know, kind of moved on with the business classes, will we keep the posting up? Would it ever come back? Like, I know in that you just mentioned about the transition time, but, you know, if we're a year out and someone comes, you know, through the pipeline, would we consider bringing that back?
I think there's a definite interest, so I think we would advocate for bringing it back. You know, I mean, the superintendent can weigh in on that.
Yeah, obviously, we can keep the posting up as long as you would like. The only problem with that is the Air Force, of course. And so if we basically end up closing the program, which we would have to do for potentially the year, they're probably going to give us a cutoff date by which we can reestablish. This is a national problem for them based on, you know, the stats that you heard. So they're trying to consolidate as well so that they can send available candidates to less and less districts so that they can actually fill the open positions that they have. So there is a question there of whether or not the Air Force would allow it to stay open for as long as we needed to stay open to find somebody. But we'll keep it open for as long as you wish, in the hopes of filling it, as long as the Air Force cooperates with that.
Okay, that sounds great. And you had mentioned that there are 200 districts that have vacancies for this position. Are there other Massachusetts communities how many Massachusetts communities are on that waiting list or posting list?
As of about an hour ago, there are 3, including North Quincy High. We have South High in Worcester and Springfield Central High School. Those are the only 3 in Massachusetts.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's helpful to know. And just a couple other questions or thoughts. So the kids also, because of the level of community service that they do, actually provide like a really great service to a lot of the nonprofit groups around the city. I know they participate obviously in parades, but they also participate in cleanups with different, you know, Friends of Wollaston Beach, different things like that. Are those opportunities still going to be are they going to be, you know, maybe even better advertised through maybe guidance or something so that the kiddos that still kind of have that as a priority in their life could still sort of partake in those?
I think, yes, for sure. I think the kids that are in ROTC have a deep desire to serve their community. And regardless of whether or not there's a ROTC official program or not, our students are going to continue to serve in a multitude of ways. It may not be with the uniform on, but Sarge has really instilled in his cadets the belief of service, integrity, honesty, et cetera. So in some way, shape, or form, we certainly will continue to do that. And there are so many little projects that they work on that don't get the kind of publicity that the parades do or Flag Day does, that they do solely for our school and for the students and staff in our school. So we'll be looking to help them to find ways to continue to serve.
That's great. I was kind of wondering if there might be like a club that got formed or something that could kind of, you know, provide similar structure, similar opportunities that these kids may want to kind of participate and still stay together and do it, something like that. So if there was some kind of club or way that they could sort of stay together and still do that, that would be fantastic, just to, I think, I actually, the kids at North Quincy High, whether they're in the ROTC program or not, I find that they just, they have a high level of discipline and integrity and service. I think you instill that in them from a principal standpoint. So I would love to see even more kids kind of join that club too. So if we have to say goodbye to the program, at least those kids can still have that community.
They have quite a few ideas already,
Okay. Good.
clubs and all sorts of things. I have a meeting with who would have been the top 5 cadets, which we would find out next Thursday at the excuse me, banquet. But we're going to sit down next week and talk about things like that
That's great.
for the
Thank you.
students that are in.
And just the last thing, just more of a point of fact for you guys to know. So I did reach out to a few kind of connections that I have. I reached out to State Rep Bruce Ayers and Senator Markey's office, and just to see if there was any connection or any help they could provide in sort of reaching out to the military, just in the ways they know, just to let them know how impactful that program is for our community and your school and our students. So I don't know if that'll get us anywhere, but I did try that. So maybe that'll help, but.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't think of a PTO event that I haven't been to. There's been some of the cadets there helping out in some way, shape, or form, whether it's the expo or the Montclair Festival or.
Multicultural fair,
Right.
which will be next,
Oh,
this
yes,
weekend?
they're at everything. They help out with our Porch Fest and Saturdays in the Park, too, so even the organizations and stuff that are around the city. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the presentation. We greatly appreciate it. If you have any more questions at this time, so thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Have a good night.
Hello. Next on the agenda, we have AI in the Quincy Public Schools. Take it away, Mr. Marani.
Great, thank you. Good evening. I want to just acknowledge my appreciation for the opportunity to speak about the very important subject that is artificial intelligence. So I'm grateful to be here tonight. When we look at what we'll be covering tonight, the first will be a quick review of the opportunities and risks that come with artificial intelligence. It's not an exhaustive list, however, it's just important to look at the opportunities and risks that are associated with the potential impact that AI could have on teaching and learning, and that should be guiding our decision-making process as we move forward. So I'll quickly review the opportunities and risks. I'll also talk a little bit about the current status in terms of the work that's been done thus far, both at the state level, but also here throughout the district. So I'll go over some specifics there. And then I'll shift gears to some factors that we need to look at when we look at potential policy considerations for the future. I also want to highlight that I'll reference policy quite a bit. However, it's also guidelines too. So in some of the samples that we've looked at throughout the state, a lot of it is in the form of guidelines. So I'll dig into that a little bit more as we move forward, and then talk about next steps, a potential path forward to figure out where we're going with artificial intelligence in the near short-term future throughout Quincy Public Schools. So ultimately, the objective tonight is to solicit your input and your perspective around potential policy and guideline language. So it's really about identifying the important factors, getting your input so that we can really start to formulate what it might look like. But again, there's some timelines when we look at what the state has been doing that it's important that you are all aware of, because that's going to influence our timeline in terms of our actions. So as I mentioned, there's opportunities and risks. I don't think any of this is new for anybody, but it is important just to put out there. And I do want to just highlight that this is not an exhaustive list, particularly with the rapidly evolving nature of artificial intelligence. There's opportunities and risks that can surface, resurface later. They can go away in a little bit. So it's important to note that. However, starting with the opportunities, the two most exciting opportunities, the first two bullets there, personalized and differentiated learning. Obviously, artificial intelligence can make that experience more accessible to a variety of learners. and also just increased efficiency for educators. And I do just want to mention that this is really in their lesson plan designing, in their curriculum designing. So as they prepare their lessons, artificial intelligence can be a great tool that helps them do that in a more efficient manner. It allows them to basically focus more of their attention towards their interactions and relationships with their students, as opposed to, planning out thorough lessons. This just makes it a quicker process for them. Of course, we want to make sure that artificial intelligence that's used supports students for their skill development. So it's the tool that is artificial intelligence, and in most cases when we talk about that, we're saying generative AI, so most people know ChatGPT. But the reality is this can be an at-home tutor for many kids when they know how to use it appropriately, when they're educated on how to use it appropriately. So the opportunity there for just support as students complete homework and other assignments, they can really get individualized, customized support. Again, we have to be careful because there are risks, but that is a potential opportunity. And then, of course, whenever we look at technology, the reality is artificial intelligence is a tool that is being used in real-world application right now across a variety of industries. And it is our job as educators to look at what these students will need in the future as far as the skills they bring to the workforce. And so this is an opportunity to make sure that they're exposed to real-world tools and technologies. So that's important to note. Now, some of the risks or some of the concerns that are worth mentioning. Academic integrity, that was kind of like the first one right out the gate when AI came about. That was kind of the first fear everybody had, was academic integrity, what's going to happen if students can press a button and have essays generated, things of that nature. So that's absolutely a risk that we'll need to consider in any sort of policy or guideline language that we develop and put out there. Of course, an over-reliance on AI tools, that's absolutely a risk that we have to be wary of. I think that's a risk for everybody, adults and kids included. I think it's obviously very important to recognize that as students grow, their development is really crucial, and it can be affected negatively if there's an overuse of artificial intelligence. So we want to make sure our students are developing appropriately as they go from elementary to middle to high school. So we want to avoid that over-reliance. Of course, the misinformation and the bias. We have to recognize that in most generative AI platforms, they're pulling information from the internet. That's a variety of live information, and therefore it might not be accurate. It might be biased, or it might intentionally misinform, and it might come off as very, very accurate to an untrained eye. And so it's just very important that we are acknowledging that as a risk. And finally, the data privacy and security considerations. Again, I don't think any of this is new. It's just important to highlight as we kind of frame the next few slides that all of the decision-making that we make should be considering these items. And as I mentioned when I started this, I did say, I hope to kind of gather your input. I fully acknowledge that these are not the only opportunities and the only risks that exist. I would say they're the major items worth highlighting tonight. So now when we shift to the current status and we look at what the what the Department of Education has done thus far. So I'll walk through it very quickly. In December of 2024, they put together a task force which was tasked with producing recommendations for state actions to support what AI might look like in schools K-12. The three items that they decided to prioritize out of that 2024 task force were resource creation, so resources for districts to possibly look at and use to help guide decision-making at each district, professional development opportunities. What was an interesting factor in that time around 2024, it's still a factor now, but I think it was more so then, was there was almost a fire hose of PD coming at everybody. And the challenge was vetting what was quality PD and what wasn't, because everybody just kind of threw AI in their PD title. And it was really on us to make sure, is this professional development for educators? Is it truly useful? Or is somebody just trying to kind of capture the momentum of AI? And so that was certainly a challenge in the beginning. I'm not going to say it's not a challenge anymore, but things have started to kind of stabilize on that front. And then they did mention that they would offer some policy supports. So again, that was starting in December 2024. Now fast forward to the spring and summer of 2025. There were two major outcomes through that task force. Initially, the first one was the mass guidance for artificial intelligence in K-12 education. That's available on the DESE's website. It's a pretty heavy document. There's a lot there, so it's not a one sit down and read, but it's definitely, grab a pen and kind of go through it and make notes throughout it. But that's a great resource to get a sense of where the Department of Ed stands on artificial intelligence. And so they offered that. That became available summer of 2025. And then they also provided professional development in the form of focusing on AI literacy for educators, not for students, but for educators. Because if you remember, just a few years ago, everybody was kind of wondering, like, what is this? What is artificial intelligence? And I remember when I presented on it just a few years ago, it was really an explanation of what it is. So many of us have evolved since then. Many of us have learned more about it. But there was a lot of professional development from the state, just making school districts aware of what was out there, helping us vet what was quality and what wasn't. I'm proud to say, which I'll share next slide, we had, in my opinion, a nice wide variety of offerings for high quality AI based professional development. But again, those were the two items that came out in 2025. And then throughout this current school year, so 2025, 2026, they focused on implementation support. So they put together another AI task force. So we're fortunate enough where, fortunately, I've been added to that team, and then also Dr. Strakadine, he's the physics teacher over at North Quincy High School. He was added to that team as well. So we're very lucky because they don't necessarily allow, everybody who wants to be on that team. They are somewhat selective. So for us to have an administrator and a classroom teacher on that team is actually, it's a great opportunity to really see kind of where the state wants to go next. I can share that our work right now as part of that task force, we're focusing on creating some guidance for districts in terms of the tool adoption process. So in other words, how can districts safely adopt tools that are using artificial intelligence? When you consider the risks that I just mentioned, we have to make sure that there's a process in place. Again, Quincy is in a good place when you look at the existing user agreement. There's already practices in place that protect the privacy of our students and the educational information that we use as educators. But again, it's important that there's a tool there specifically that helps people adopt tools that use AI. And then the other focus in the work that we've been doing this year is age-appropriate pedagogical practices. So that we kind of break off into two teams, and one is for pedagogy and how AI should influence it and how it shouldn't influence it. So that's not the team I'm on. I'm on the team that's focusing on the tool adoption. However, those are the two products that we're working on, and we hope to have those out at some point next year. But what's crucially important and that I want to share is if you look at that bottom item there, school year 26-27, that's when they're going to be sharing a lot of thoughtful input around policy considerations. And so that's obviously very important. I know that with a subject like artificial intelligence, a lot of people want structure, want guidance, and they want it right away. The reality is there aren't a ton of districts currently in Massachusetts that actually have an active policy, and those that do, quite honestly, I've only been able to find one district, which I'll talk about momentarily, that has language, and it's very, very broad. Most districts have some form of guidelines, which we have too, and I'll talk about that. So I definitely, and I'll say this probably a couple times throughout, but it would be my recommendation that before any policy proposed language is offered to school committee, we really wait on the Department of Ed to see what sort of policy considerations they offer us. If you remember back when we wrote the policy for competency determination, we were proactive, we got that done, and then DESE came out with more input, we had to go and make additional amendments. So if that can be avoided, I think that would be worth it. So now when we look at some of the work that's been done in Quincy, so it initially started with exploration and awareness. So that happened in the form of different team members attending different conferences, whether that was MassQ, We have a nice, strong partnership with Boston University. We've been able to attend a couple of their conferences as well, among others. And so those conferences at the very beginning were really just around district-level conversations regarding what the potential impact might be. So it was kind of a lot of people speculating, but not too many people knowing actually, what will the impact be. It was great to talk to other people from different districts across the state because it kind of brought us together to say, okay, we all share the same concerns. We're all operating, with caution as we move forward. But there were a lot of people who brought up great points and asked some thoughtful questions that are, I think, helpful as we move forward. Of course, we've monitored the emerging guidance from DESE, and we've reviewed early research and examples of other districts. So just some of the other districts that we've looked at that has some pretty substantive work: Westwood, Newton, and Boston. I should just add, from my understanding, based on my last review, they don't have policy language, but they do have pretty hefty guidelines. So that's a great model to look at. I'll just repeat that again. So Westwood, Newton, and Boston. And then as far as policy language, Medford had a proposal at this year. However, it hasn't been approved yet. I don't know the current status of where that's going. I don't know if it's going to be approved, but there was proposed policy language that I found in one of the local Medford newspapers. So that was proposed. And the only one that I was able to actually find was the Hingham School District. They do have an approved policy. And I'll just, if you'll bear with me, I'll just read that policy to you just to share kind of the broadness of that policy language. This isn't a criticism or anything. It's just so that you know kind of what the existing policy sounds like. And again, this is for Hingham School Committee. So they acknowledge that the growing influence of artificial intelligence in education. The Hingham Public School District is committed to preparing our students for their futures. Therefore, it is essential for our students to develop fluency in digital technologies and critical thinking skills while also honoring their commitment to academic integrity. And so that's the bulk of it. And then it goes to the committee will direct the administration to develop procedures in line with current district policy and state and federal laws regarding the protection of students' information. Such regulations will be reviewed regularly and revised as needed. And that's the language. So it's broad. And essentially, I certainly don't want to paraphrase this inaccurately. However, essentially what they're saying is we acknowledge it exists and we hope there's procedures that will, remedy any issue with that, right? And so I think we'll probably need to be a little bit more detailed than that. But I just wanted to share with you, for those that are jumping at policy a little early, I think they're intentionally staying broad because, again, this is a rapidly evolving subject. And so we have to word things in an evergreen way, which is going to be difficult to do given the nature of artificial intelligence. More recently, over the last couple of years, we've focused a lot of our efforts on educator engagement. So working with educators to plan and really understand what artificial intelligence is, what it might look like in a classroom in the near future. So first, we put an AI planning team together. This was actually before DESE put their task force together. So there was a period of time where school districts were just kind of waiting for something from DESE. Instead of waiting, we put a team together and just started having that conversation around what should our considerations be? What is important? What resources are out there? So we really did two things as a team. We developed a database of resources at the time, many of which are probably outdated at this point, even though it's only a couple of years old. But then we also put together a draft language for guidelines. Initially, our goal, and I did present on this a couple of years ago, but initially our goal was to develop policy language. But it was in our research and our work where we saw, this makes more sense to frame as guidelines so that we can check it every year and update it. So maybe that would live on a website, in a web page within Quincy Public Schools, similar to the Attendance Matters format where there's multiple pages within that section. So that could be a potential option, and or school-based handbooks. So again, all options where we can, I'm happy to get your input. But anyway, so in addition to that planning team, we also had, so Dr. Stracadine, again, the physics teacher over at North Quincy, myself, and Mr. Pacho from the IT department, We were part of the DESI's AI District Leader Cohort. That was 2 years ago. So we got to be a part of that. We worked on a lot of the same things that I just mentioned. And now most recently, as I mentioned, Dr. Strakadine and I are members of the DESI's AI Task Force. And then finally, as far as educator engagement, we've offered quite a bit of professional development. Our focus really has been in this very confusing time that comes out of artificial intelligence. How do we get more information to teachers so that they can feel a little bit more comfortable with an uncomfortable technology, at least at first? So just some, not all, but some of the PDs that we've offered. One in the earlier days, and actually we have been offering it every year, is just called Exploring the Potential of ChatGPT. So that was more of like a AI 101. So for the teachers that just wanted to understand what it was, what it could do, that was a great PD. We also had a more narrowed down focus, so AI and mathematics. So what's the potential teaching and learning impacts of AI in a math classroom? We also had something similar for STEAM, right? So science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. We had another one called How Can AI Elevate Your Literacy Instruction? And finally, Navigating Plagiarism and AI Policies. And those are just some anecdotal examples. Those were offered throughout the year and also during the previous professional days of learnings, from the first one 3 years ago and ongoing throughout. We certainly plan to continue offering professional development. That's just gonna be a staple, as we always do, but we'll consider that moving forward. So we've done quite a bit of work, and so now shifting a little bit to more policy considerations. And again, policy, I have a note there that says, given the rapid evolution of AI, it is recommended that careful consideration is placed on whether language should be included as policy or as guidelines. Again, we really want to look and say, what should policy be solving, and then what should guidelines be solving? Because the guidelines should be something that we can change year to year as the needs arise. Obviously, having to amend policy on a regular basis is going to be taxing, and we don't want to put ourselves in a position if that can be avoided. But just a couple of the items that we want to consider, regardless of kind of how we want to move forward in terms of the language that we use. And I would say that this is also non-exhaustive, so there's other items, and certainly if anybody has other items, we'll make note of that. But the first one, data privacy and security. We, of course, want to make sure that all educational records are treated with the privacy and confidentiality that is legally required. Transparency and accountability, that is essentially in the use, making sure that if it's used by an educator, if it's used by a student, that there's a way that it's transparently used and it's communicated in an effective way. And I'll go in the next couple slides after this, kind of break it down to student use and educator use, just in terms of digging a little bit deeper into the considerations. Of course, bias awareness and mitigating said bias, so that's obviously important. This bullet point, human oversight and educator judgment, to me, this is absolutely crucial. And if you'll bear with me, because I want to be very intentional with my words here, AI supports but does not replace educators. Teachers bring context, right? They bring moral reasoning, they bring empathy to the classroom, to our students. And so in no way can AI or any other machine do that. And it's important that I state that out loud to all of you. We just have to make sure in everything we do that we keep that at the forefront and that we keep the humanity in the instruction. Okay, so I'll say that. I don't think anybody here disagrees, but it's just important to verbalize. And of course, the last item there, academic integrity. It is a concern. Now, some of these concerns can be addressed via instructional strategies, right? So for example, if a student is writing an essay and there's a potential concern that they're overusing artificial intelligence, well, there's activities in the following lessons that you can incorporate to address that, right? Like you can ask a student, okay, what did you mean by this statement right here, right? So something as simple as that, if they're over depending on artificial intelligence, answering that question is going to be very difficult to do. Now, that's not an answer for everything. I'm just saying that there's a combination of very basic strategies that can be employed in the classroom to at least mitigate the overuse of AI. I'm not saying it would completely diminish it, but it would address it a little bit. And so as we look at these, I do just want to go a little bit deeper. So just looking at student use. So we just want to make sure that when we're developing language, again, policy or guidelines in terms of how students might be using it, academic integrity means we're answering the questions that when is AI use appropriate and when is it not permitted? So that has to be clear to our students when they should and should not be using it. And then also, if they're going to use it, what are our expectations as the adults of how it's going to be cited, how it's going to be disclosed? If we want it to be transparent, we have to give them a way to be transparent in their use. Skill development, ensuring that the students still develop the core skills. So remember, we want to avoid that over-dependence, and so we have to make sure that we're still prioritizing the core skills and avoiding that over-reliance. Making sure that anything we use is accessible in an equitable manner, right? So consistency across classrooms and schools, making sure that access to the tools that we have are accessible across the district within the appropriate age range that they need to be. And I do just want to say that, as we, kind of figure out equity and access, consistency across classrooms and schools, it's also important to take into account teacher judgment and autonomy. So we want to find that middle ground of allowing teachers to still move forward with their style, with their teaching style, but also ensuring that there's consistency in terms of access to high-level instruction across the district. That exists already, but it will certainly be a priority as we move forward. Digital literacy, students need to know if they're going to use it that some of what will be generated will not be accurate, will be flat out false at times. And so we need to equip students with the tools and the skills to make sure that they can find that and rectify that. And so it's very important that they know how to vet that, and they need to be responsible when they use it, when it's appropriately used, and they need to be ethical. And so it's very, very important that they're using it appropriately, and we need to teach them how to do that. And finally, just making sure that the expectations speak to the different age levels. A high school student who's a senior in high school is going to be a little bit different than a 13-year-old. And so it's important that, as I mentioned earlier, that we're considering the stages of development for our students as we think about student use and any policy or guideline language that we might write in the future. Shifting gears to the educator perspective, so instructional use. So it's making sure that it's used for lesson planning, differentiation, assessment design, also supplementing curriculum but not replacing curriculum, but also making sure that the professional judgment is owned by the educators at all points. So if they're putting content out there, whether it's AI generated or not, that they're owning that as they put it out there. And so therefore, for the same reason we want to teach our students to use it responsibly, the expectation would be that educators are as well. And so we would want to use wording accordingly. Making sure that teachers can take advantage of this as a tool. As we mentioned, there's an opportunity for them to streamline some of their tasks so that they can focus on the more important things, the relationships with students, the direct support to students. That's what this potentially creates. And also, again, maintaining the quality and accuracy. So I do just want to share a quick anecdote. Dr. Perkins, Ms. Vaughn, and I were at a classroom just a few days ago, and students were reading an article. It was actually about artificial intelligence, the pros and the cons, but the reason why I bring this up is because it was initially an article that was probably for an adult reader in terms of the Lexile level. That teacher was able to use artificial intelligence to bring it down to a 7th grade reading level. So we were able to access this topic, but very easily bring it down to now a reading accessible level for those students, which then turned into a debate among those students in terms of, what are the pros, what are the cons. So that's just an example that we saw just a few days ago where teachers can now take articles that might not have been accessible depending on the average reading abilities of their students and the grade levels that they're in, and now they easily make something accessible. That's a great opportunity, and that should absolutely be leveraged. So we want to consider that. The professional responsibility, verifying that the AI-generated content, to some degree that goes without saying because we have a user agreement already for technology, the use of technology among educators, where they're responsible for all of that, making sure that the privacy of the student information is considered. So in that case, it wouldn't be new, but it's worth noting here. And again, data privacy and consistency across the classrooms, as I mentioned, are priorities as we consider any sort of policy language or guideline language. So finally, to wrap it up, just some potential next steps. But again, I am certainly open to any input among any school committee member. We would like to possibly consider developing either policy proposal language and or guideline language. But as I mentioned, I do think it is worth it to wait until DESE does provide us with some more guidance there. If we invest a lot of our energy and efforts in developing something that then needs to be quickly amended, it's probably not the best use of time with all the different issues that we manage throughout a school year. We also want to continue offering AI-based professional development, and finally, investigate AI literacy options and resources. So I do just want to say that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has made available a list of different curricula around student-based AI literacy. However, they have not created any AI literacy standards. And so to me, you don't want to go too deep into a curriculum if those standards aren't there yet. I know that, again, that's kind of on their list of upcoming. I don't have a set time as to when that's going to come. I'm hoping after policy. But I will say that Quincy Public Schools is in a good position when you actually look at the staffing we have at the different levels. So when you look at elementary, we have the digital literacy team. So we have educators currently working on digital literacy standards with our elementary students. We have library and media along with tech engineering at the middle school level, and of course at the high school level, a variety of electives. So QPS is poised to, when AI literacy, if and when it's shared from DESE to us, if there's specific standards, we're in a good spot to quickly adopt that. We have kind of the mechanisms in place. And so that's worth, in my opinion, that would be the hardest part for districts, trying to get that in place if it wasn't in place. So to me, we've kind of taken the biggest step forward there. Now it's a matter of kind of waiting on what those standards are, because again, we don't want to rush into teaching AI use into grade 3, grade 4, if we don't have that guidance from the state. That would not be something that I would recommend at this time. But with that, I'll certainly open it up to any of the questions, comments, any input you want to share. Really open to anything that you think is worth considering, maybe beyond what I said, as we start planning for next year.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Any sort of a idea on the timeline where they're saying 26, 27, anywhere in there that they're,
For policy?
yeah.
Well, typically, to be optimistic, typically they do that in the summer, right? So if we match it to the guidelines that they gave, it was last summer, so I would hope it would be this summer. I don't have specifics. I've been trying to get specifics. They're not giving us specifics, but I'm hopeful that it's summer or fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Leung.
Thank you, Mr. Marani, for this. Very informative. I would agree. Your lists are not, exhaustive, but I think you cover, the big topics, and certainly encouraged that you are thinking about these things and that you're open to, working with us to come up with appropriate policy and guidelines. I certainly am happy to share my perspective as someone who works in finance and technology, where we have a front row seat to the adoption of these generative AI tools. And from that perspective, it's more of a kind of life or death, consideration, right? Adopt or you get, just destroyed by your competitors. I think I would agree with you that we shouldn't rush into anything. And I tend to agree with you that, we should see what DESE comes out with. A couple things I would suggest. I'd like to know more about things that are going on now and things that you can be doing in the meantime, right? Because as nice as it would be to just wait until you hear from DESE the reality is, I'm sure there are educators and students using these tools
yeah.
now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so things have to be in place now to ensure academic integrity and ensure safety of our students. So there's that. And then I would also add, I guess, to your list, more planning and thought should be devoted to the kind of social and emotional impacts, right? Because with AI, there's already, I think we're already in kind of dire straits with things like AI companions. There are these, apps and tools that are basically hacking, the kind of emotional and affection triggers, and young people in particular are just at a greater risk of succumbing to those dangers and possibly going down the wrong path. And then I would also suggest, some community feedback, right? Hearing what, parents and, students feel about these tools. So those are my initial thoughts. I have, excuse me, a ton of, thoughts and resources available to me, so happy to continue the discussion.
Great. Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I remember being listening to the last time that you presented on it, and you're absolutely right. Like, no one really knew what it was, or
Right.
we weren't even really kind of sure, and there was just kind of one program that
Right.
everyone was using, and I didn't even know if my kids were using it at that point. So
Right.
definitely a different. It's evolving, and it's evolving fast. And
Quickly,
my concerns were a lot of what Mr. Leong shared about what do we do in the meantime. I do think waiting until, DESE comes out with something policy-wise that we could create, and staying broad on that. I know we, on the Mass Association of School Committees, I sat in on a session where they were suggesting kind of more guidelines than policy, or if you
Yeah.
did policy, kind of going broad so that you didn't have to revise it every month.
Right.
So definitely understanding what DESE comes up with in that. I'd like to see it first, but maybe just some guidelines that we could put in place in the meantime, maybe in the handbook in the fall, just in case those guidelines don't come out in the summer like we planned. So maybe something for the fall handbooks that you guys may think is appropriate to put in there, and showing us beforehand. I would love to see, so this was presented to us, which I appreciate, but I know that there's 4 other members on the committee that may also have input on this, so I'm not sure if you want to do kind of a consolidated version of this on a full agenda, maybe at, not our Wednesday meeting, but maybe one after that, either the last one in May
I'd be
or
happy
June.
to, sure.
Just to get kind of their input officially as well.
Yep.
And then I would just be curious about the, so I know you've talked a lot about PD for educators. What has the educator involvement been in what you've developed and researched so far as, you have like a student use or student concerns? Were the educators brought in developing that, or were they kind of just more siloed in the PD portion of the AI world here?
So in every case, in every one of the teams that I mentioned, there were classroom teachers involved. So in the very beginning, when we had the artificial intelligence planning team, we made sure we prioritized at that point high school educators. Again, we were still learning, really what it was, and it felt like we wanted to prioritize high school. But we have gone out of our way to make sure that in all of these teams that we've put together, there's a classroom teacher or more. So the challenge is when we're part of the DESE task force, we're limited in terms of the amount. So when we had that leadership cohort that I mentioned, we were only allowed 3 spots. So at that point, we said, okay, we want a classroom educator, we want a representative from IT, and we want a district administrator. And so that, that comprised the team. But, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I want to say we had 10 Our AI planning team had 10 members, and 7 of those people were teachers, were classroom teachers. And so they'll absolutely continue to be a part of that conversation. And Mr. Leung, to your point as well, community feedback in that conversation and planning as well, certainly important, and one that, as we get a little bit more kind of down on paper, I think we should absolutely create opportunities for community to provide feedback and educate, school building educators, whether it's a guidance counselor to the SELPs, classroom teacher, we'll absolutely continue to keep them in that conversation. But yes, teachers have been a big part of it. And it's one of the most popular, tracks as far as PD goes. So when we look at Professional Day of Learning and we see how people sign up, those often those are kind of the first to fill up, and we often create more space and create more spaces for people to participate.
That's great. And that's also, it was kind of making me say that maybe we should have some type of guidelines, even if it's not policy in the fall handbook, because I think, educators may be looking for a little bit of guidance on how they should be using it or how they should be monitoring it in students. And just, like the cell phone policy where we kind of took our cues, we put a policy in place, thought that it was going to be enough, and educators told us it wasn't. So that's sort of what I mean. I feel like
Sure.
they have kind of a front row seat to how AI is playing out in their classrooms and with the students, and what maybe we think there's a challenge that, we're really afraid of that actually they're not seeing. So
Right.
just kind of keeping, that's why I'd really like to get, make sure they're staying critically involved in what we're doing in our guidelines and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do just want to say to that point, we do have draft guidelines right now. I do want to emphasize that it's draft. But that is, like I said, so 70% of that team were classroom educators, and that will be the starting point in terms of what we produce for next year. That will be the content that we start to look. I think we'll have to update it and amend it a little bit. So again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but one thing I'm picturing is a pretty thorough webpage on Quincy Public Schools that talks about AI in QPS, with guidelines, not just for students, not just for educators, but also for families. What can you do at home to help students use it appropriately or not use it, right? How to tell when it's okay to use, when it's not okay to use. And so our language that we have right now around guidance does speak to students, educators, and of course, when I say educators, I also want to say like administration as well. So, everybody running or in a school and district administration, and of course, families as well.
Yeah, that might be a good opportunity to share some of the language of the draft that you have at a future meeting, where if you come before the full committee, you can kind of get everyone's input and share those drafts. That would be excellent.
Not a problem. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I totally agree with my colleagues. I think that we absolutely should wait for Desi's guidance on that. And I think it was wonderful having the draft guide that the teachers had input in on. And I think that if we had the student guide, running that by our student councils would be a great thing to do, because that way we could get feedback as they looked at it, and then we could have like a talking group kind of a thing with them. I think that would be wonderful. I mean, surveys are great, but I think when you can actually have the piece of paper in front and have them read it and have them talk as a group together and collaborate with each other, I think that's a great way to bounce ideas off. Mr. Leung?
To ask a follow-up question. It was spurred by Ms. Perdios's line of questioning, but could you tell us more about the planning that goes into the professional development programs? And what I mean by that is, obviously it is a very popular topic, and so has the leadership team kind of put kind of strategy around how to prioritize who gets those opportunities, and is it by topic or subject matter? And then after that, during the kind of training process, professional development process, these educators are choosing their own generative AI tool, or have you provided any guidance or support to having them experiment with what they're learning? in that?
Sure. So I'll speak to the PD aspect first, and then I'll kind of go into the tools aspect. So from a PD standpoint, I think the best answer I can give you is it's done very collaboratively. And so there's, between the different SEL PD that we have, all the different academic curriculum-based PD that we have, and then, of course, other topics that come up, like artificial intelligence and other resources. So a few years ago, it might have been PBIS was a big initiative across the district, and now that that's up and running, you might not need as much PD towards that because that's now an initiative that has been kind of built, and now it's a mechanism that's moving forward. And so what we're trying to do, it's not an easy task because we try to get as much PD out there to educators as much as we can. So it's going to come down to looking at, do we have a new curriculum? So for example, we just recently adopted Desmos at the middle school level for math educators. So that has to be a priority because we have to work with those teachers to get them comfortable with that. So it's about trying to find time for the other different subjects that are there. I'm not going to say it's done easily, but it's done very, very thoughtfully, and we're looking at it with a multi-year perspective so that we can possibly incorporate, all those different through lines, whether it's SEL, whether it's curriculum, whether it's technology based. And so we're always trying to kind of come back and connect the dots as we move forward. For the PD day, what we do is, the whole curriculum team, we're working together to try and get the best offerings, the best variety of offerings that's going to speak to essentially every position, every professional position, K-12, pre-K to 12 throughout the district. And so at that point, we're just trying to get as much high quality offerings as we can. And then we're monitoring what did people like and what did they not like. We monitor that through feedback forms. We also monitor that through what are they signing up for. And then at that point, we look at the feedback. Okay, they want more AI. Let's look in that. But they might say we would like specifically what AI's impact might be on a science classroom. So then we go and look for that relative PD. It's not always easy to find, but that's what I mean by collaboratively. I hope that answers the question. And now specifically with the tools. So I would say right now our user agreement is the guiding policy as far as what teachers are using, the staff user agreement. And so right now, if you look at that user agreement, there's software that the district will make available to educators, depending on their level. One thing that's available for all educators is the Google Suite, right? So whether you're a pre-K teacher all the way up to grade 12, you're going to have Google Suite. So what's nice about that, because that's now made available by the district to everybody, we take care of making sure that the privacy policy, all the educational information that might be inputted into that is protected, and we're honoring FERPA, right? And ensuring that the confidentiality of all our students is valued at all points. And so I would say as far as the tools go, I can't say specifically we say here's the AI tool that you can or can't use. That's what we're hoping to work on right now with the DESE task force, and what we hope to have a little bit more information on in the near future by the end of this year. But we're constantly looking at all the different forms of technology. I'd say one challenge is a lot of these platforms that we've invested in for years that weren't initially artificial intelligence have slowly started to embed artificial intelligence. So it's ongoing communication with those vendors to make sure that any changes they're making are still upholding our requirements. Again, I hope that it's somewhat of a convoluted answer. I hope that answers your question. I'll gladly clarify in any way.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but we're almost there.
Yeah, thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, and with that, I have a motion to adjourn. Motion by Ms. Bertios. Thank you.